Apple just released their latest version of the most popular laptop, the M3 MacBook Air. This promises to be faster, quieter, and more powerful than previous MacBooks and all of its competition. I put away my MacBook Pro and swapped to using this primarily as my only computer for the last week. So how did it go? Was it actually quieter, faster, and more powerful? I think we said those in the wrong order that time. Two things up front. While Apple let me borrow a midnight M3 MacBook Air, which we used in the unboxing and accessory videos, the laptop used over the last week is a Starlight version that I purchased myself with my own money. Second, let's cover the specs and ordering options for this tiny laptop if you aren't as immersed in laptop lore as, laptop nerds like me. The M3 MacBook Air comes in at a base model price of $1099. For that money, you'll get the latest 8-core M3 processor, 8-core GPU, 8 gigabytes of unified memory, and a 256 gigabyte solid-state drive. You can take this up a little bit in specs to an 8-core CPU, 10-core GPU, 24 gigabytes of unified memory, and a 2 terabyte SSD model for $2299. That's getting pretty high up there. The model that I personally bought is somewhere in the middle. I've got the higher end base model, and I call them base models if you can buy them in the store. This one has the 10-core GPU, 16 gigabytes unified memory, and a 512 gigabyte solid state drive, and it cost me $1499, which I can't call these cheap, but for what you get and what we're gonna talk about, I don't hate the price. When it comes to new features compared to the M2 MacBook Air, physically, there isn't really anything. This is built off the same chassis as last year's model. You get the same aluminum constructed shell, which is still beautiful by the way. I really like how this looks and feels to use, but we'll get more into my personal likes and dislikes in a second. You get the same 13.6 inch liquid retina display at 500 nits of brightness, the same ports, and pretty much the same everything. If you were to hold an M2 and an M3 MacBook Air in your hand at the same time, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Is this even an M3 MacBook Air? Is this an elaborate ruse? It was an expensive ruse if it was elaborate. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing because it keeps you from needing to buy an M3 if you currently are happy with your M2 Air. One of the things I get really frustrated about that folks are like, no, it's gotta be new and crazy every year. That means you have to buy the new crazy thing every year. If it's evolutions, that means you don't have to buy it as much. There is one really standout new feature that is kind of a big deal to me personally, but it's both a positive and a negative. And you know what? Let's get into that right now. Over the past week, the thing that I've liked the most, but also been the most frustrated about, is the latest update that allows for 2 external displays at the same time with this latest MacBook Air, and I do believe it's coming to the M3 standard MacBook Pros as well. I've begged for this for literal years at this point, ever since the M1 Air came out, and I'm really glad to see that this is finally happening. You can export out to a 6K display all the time. But if you close the lid, you can then also export out to a 5K display. And both of those monitors can be up to 60 Hertz. If you're only doing one monitor, you don't get like 120 Hertz. They're both 60 Hertz all the time. So in my likes, well, yeah, I love that I can finally use this in my home office or in my work setting. Every single office I've ever worked in as a program manager has a 2-screen setup. And my personal home office, as you can see right there, it has 2 screens. Not being able to do this was essentially an Achilles heel for the MacBook Airs to be used as all-in-one computer solutions. So I don't know, what am I actually going to complain about in the future? I might have to just be happy about something, and nobody is allowed to be happy about anything on the internet. But the reason I said I've been kind of frustrating is sometimes this is kind of wonky. I've had several occasions over the past week where only one screen will work at a time. Like when I sit down, only the main screen or the alternate screen. Like it isn't consistent either. Only one will turn on when I go to wake up the computer. And it's not until I open and close the laptop lid that the computer realizes that it's in desktop mode, so to speak. And that sounds like a small complaint, but I'm not gonna recommend folks spend money on something that adds a step of fiddliness to the process compared to other options out there. The M1 standard MacBook Pro 14 is really close in price and doesn't have this problem and still has more ports. They probably should not have made the M1 MacBook Pro 14. It's too good. This monitor thing is just frustrating, and hopefully over time or with the next firmware update, they'll be able to get this to a more consistent experience. The second thing I didn't like, just because I'm in a contrarian mood now, I guess, I still don't like the midnight color option, and that is the MacBook that Apple is letting me borrow. Yes, I know they've updated the metal composition or coating or whatever to make it more fingerprint resistant, but I don't really know that they or anyone can really fix issues with darker color computers and fingerprints. You have to change, like if you're trying to do a metal finish, the darker the color, it's just not gonna work with fingerprints, and Razer and Apple both struggle here. I have fairly oily skin, and anytime I touch the midnight version, I still see fingerprints. This is absolutely, I get it, this is 100% personal preference on your tolerance level for this, but my tolerance level is pretty low. It's no secret. Watch any of my videos. I hate fingerprints on my tech. I don't see that changing anytime soon. My personal Starlight model though, look at that. Can you see that? Is amazing. I don't see any fingerprints. Well, you can see it on the Apple, but that's different. Leading to the first unapologetic thing that I like. Wow, does this laptop look good? When Apple updated the MacBook Pro lineup a few years ago, I didn't think they'd be able to translate that like angular design to this much smaller chassis, but holy crap, they did it. These new MacBook Airs might be the best looking laptops that I've ever seen. The build quality is excellent. It feels like exactly what it is, a premium travel computer from a premium computer manufacturer. And Starlight, let me give bonus points to Starlight. This is absolutely my favorite color from Apple in the last few years. I wish you could get a MacBook Pro in the Starlight color. The next thing I've mostly liked is the performance. No, not bar charts going up performance, but I put this through its paces in 2 power tasks that I regularly need. I edited my last video, the handheld gaming console video, on this M3 MacBook Air, and I had 0 issues either in the editing itself or rendering out of that video. I had this plugged directly into my dock, which has 10 gigabit Ethernet to my server, which is where all the files are stored, and I didn't have a single hiccup or slowdown using DaVinci Resolve. It's not too surprising though, right? That was surprising like when we were editing on iPads, when the M1 first came out, but the M series processors have pretty legit video encoders and decoders built internally, but it's nice to know that they're still up to the task. Rendering out was at roughly 1.5 times speed, about 50 frames per second compared to the 30 frames per second timeline that I was using. That's compared to the 3 to 4x speed I get with my M3 Max MacBook Pro 16. So while it's not the fastest, it gets you most of the way there for far less money and far less like heft, right? This is so much easier to carry around. My other power task is leading a guild in World of Warcraft Season of Discovery, and I used this during a 10-man raid evening. This meant that I had the game up, music blaring, a couple of Safari tabs open with my roster management, and Discord up for voice communication, and the MacBook performed mostly well. 90% of the time, I wasn't really able to tell the difference between performance on my MacBook Pro or my MacBook Air. However, there were a few times though where particle effects by getting blasted in the face with lightning or poison clouds, don't worry about it. It was too much for the M3 and its GPU. During a boss fight or two, I had significant frame rate drop while main tanking, which is a fairly scary experience. Sorry if any of you are watching my video were on that raid with me. We made it though, right? Thankfully no wipes. It was scary. That's why I say mostly. I don't think if you weren't leading a raid in World of Warcraft Classic, you'd probably have the same problems with performance even in light gaming that I had, but for my specific needs, depending on the crazy effects that are going on the next phase, you might have problems. I've also continued to like how easy it is to get a MacBook up and running. All I had to do was transfer a few things, get my Apple ID logged in, plugged into my server, and boom, almost nothing was missing compared to my bigger MacBook Pro, and it's just so easy. That's not really a specific thing for the MacBook Air, but I thought it's something to continue mentioning, and this might be a unique perspective, right? As a YouTuber here, I hesitate doing these longer form swap videos at times. This is a hobby that I do for fun, and as a hobby, it's not my full-time gig. I don't always have time to mess around trying to totally get my life behind a new phone or a new computer. So when tech meets me most of the way, I think that's notable, and I like mentioning that because most of us, we just don't have time to be fiddling with tech. The battery life has been fine so far. It's only been a week. We'll talk more about this in the 1-month follow-up later on. The fact that the MacBook Airs can last as long as they do is crazy. I think that's legitimately one of the reasons that it's hard to recommend other travel or smaller computers is because they struggle to match this for longevity of use. This still doesn't have any fans, so it makes 0 noise in use, which was awesome. Even when doing that raid leading the other night, 0 noise. I love that. I absolutely get so sick of hearing the fans on my work-provided Windows computer, and even without a fan, I had no noticeable thermal problems while playing my video games. Seriously, once you get used to this, it's dangerous because it's really hard to go back to anything else. So in summary, what have I thought over the past week? Well, the M3 MacBook Air is a perfectly fine computer that is a step up from previous models. There's not much more to say except that. Apple didn't even have an event for this computer. They just did a press release. It was just like, the price is fine. It's pretty much the same as last year. The specs are fine. It's pretty much the same as last year. And the features are fine. Pretty much the same as last year. The dual monitor support is new and novel, however, and is probably the reason to buy this over older M1 or M2 variants if you just have to have a brand new computer. So would I recommend the M3 MacBook Air? Maybe? Maybe. I can give you a solid maybe. If you want the smallest, lightest computer that could do everything, then yes, this is the one I would probably recommend. If you already have an M1 or M2 and are happy, I don't think there's really a reason to buy the M3 and not just keep those. And even though I could see myself recommending this to you, what I would say is if you can wait a few months, then pick this thing up when it inevitably goes to the Apple Store refurbished. You'll get all the same things I talked about throughout the video, but for much less money. I mean, give it 3 or 4 months, you'll be able to get this for like $200-300 off and still get Apple Care and Apple's return policy. I mean, this is a fine computer, but it's more of an evolution than a revolution. But if you do need one and you're buying this right now, go ahead and click here to see all of the best accessories that go with this wonderful computer. Click, 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 click. Thanks for watching.